Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, April 2nd installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in the Valley. My name is Mike Malone, and I've been covering this town longer than anybody. I'm here with our special contributor, Scott Budman, business and tech reporter for NBC Bay Area. Once again, we are creating this podcast from our respective homes via Zoom. Our producer is Jordan Henderson. Our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove, and our host for this podcast, as always, is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. And I have a light right in my face, don't I?
A little bit, but it's all right, yeah.
All right, I'll go over here. This is what happens when you have shutters instead of... All right, wait a second here. The shutter's right across.
It's a podcast. People won't be able to tell. That's all right.
There we go. How's that? Okay, so let's start. First up, I got to mention, because we were talking last week about Intel and its new strategic moves and all of that. And I read a note from Rich Goldman, who's an expert on this stuff. And well, he heard our podcast and he got right back to me and said, "You're forgetting one crucial thing. You're talking about Intel moving quickly into this new world and responding and all that. Wafer fab facilities take 3 years to build and $10 billion. So, it's a different meaning of fast. I mean, 3 years is an entire generation in the chip business. So if they're going to do this, it's kind of be for at least a medium-term strategic move for Intel. They're not going to be at the cutting edge for a long, long time. So, the idea that, they're going to get back in the game by making some profits off of mid-range chips and then come surging back probably isn't the case. So,
right. I mean, Intel's move is a long-term move. That's what that company does. That's what that industry does. They're famous for that. And in the meantime, we've got a very short-term problem, which is a chip shortage that's hitting all sorts of industries, tech and otherwise. And is Intel going to be part of fixing that? I don't know. We may end up turning more to AMD and NVIDIA and then eventually Qualcomm. And this could be a big crisis that Intel is not part of the solution.
Well, and there's also TSMC, Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing. They're a chip maker, a manufacturer, a foundry. The world's largest contract chip maker announced Thursday expects to pour $100 billion into advanced chips over the next years to keep up with rising demand. That's a big sum of money, $100 billion. There aren't that many companies in the world that are $100 billion.
No, I mean, this is a big investment and a big move. It's almost mirroring to a certain extent what we're doing with vaccines in this country, trying to send many more doses, millions of doses to counties and states and the entire globe, obviously. And the chip industry is trying to do something similar, trying to feed chips into an entire global set of industries that is being hobbled by a chip shortage. Why? Because the pandemic had us buy so much more hardware and software, et cetera.
But it really suggests, because these guys don't mess around. They actually have their finger on the pulse, because everybody that designs chips but doesn't make them is going to TSMC right now. And if they're seeing that much of a shortage, it really says something for expected demand of new technologies in the years to come. I mean, is it AI? Is it robotics? I mean, is it autonomous vehicles? I mean, what is driving this much demand besides all of us consumers getting our boxes next to our TV? I mean, what is doing this?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, consumers are driving a lot of this because we're buying a lot more hardware now to keep up with the new software because we're working from home, et cetera. Businesses are doing the same thing, so they're buying a lot more. And you said it yourself, autonomous cars are starting to take off. All these other things that we hadn't really thought of chips as a driving factor for are using chips, and all of a sudden the demand is just super, super high, and these companies are playing catch up.
Well, it says a lot for the future of the Valley, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay, Apple. This was a story came out of nowhere. I didn't see a lot of coverage. It's announced Wednesday it's going to build a battery-based renewable energy storage facility in Central California, not in Monterey County, actually southeastern Monterey County, which I guess is, it's down by San Benito County and all that, way down there. What is this all about?
This made some news because the rumor is that they're going to use batteries from Tesla. So it would be the Apple Tesla hookup that people have been dreaming about for a long time.
A marriage we've all been dreaming of, yeah.
But in a slightly different consummation, if you will. But Apple has built these facilities, and they've the idea of electric, good for them. They've done a lot with solar. So we'll see. I mean, this is also something that's sort of future based, and so we'll see where it ends up.
Yeah, I guess it's right next door to their solar facility, right? I mean, so they're just going to dump the power and store it instead of having to use it. Okay, well, that's pretty clever when you think about it. Must cost a ton of dough, though. Okay, this is interesting. So you sent this to me. I got two conflicting stories here. Coinbase has set April 14th as its IPO date. So, suggests the IPO market is still strong. Crypto market is still strong. And we've been covering this for almost a year now, and it's still going. Yet at the same time, in Sunnyvale, Intermediate Cloud Communications, which is a business communications software company, pulled their IPO, saying it's due to challenging current conditions in the market for initial public offerings, especially for technology. Now, who's right? Are the guys that backed out basically just weren't ready for the IPO and they're blaming market conditions? I mean, it seems a little weird. It seems a little contrary to everything else we've been reading the last few months.
Right. I mean, the IPO market for tech stocks has been as strong the last 6 months as really it's ever
seen.
Yeah. Now, does that mean that all of those companies should have gone public? I would say no. Remember, part of what we're seeing, in fact, a pretty big part, is the SPAC market, these special acquisition companies to take companies public. And while that means certain companies can come public a little quicker, a little cheaper, and in some ways that's good, they can also come public with a little less due diligence, and that's not good. And so for one company to say, hey, maybe we really went deep on the due diligence and we shouldn't be doing this, good for them. But come on, the market for IPOs is pretty frothy right now. It's so strong.
Yeah, that's blaming the universe for what I suspect are specific problems. Okay, well, while we were on cyber currency and all that, Tesla hasn't done real well with his Bitcoin investment, I understand. Got that note from Bob. You think it's had any effect on PayPal? They're the other big player jumping into Bitcoin.
Well, but they're doing it differently. I mean, Tesla has a big investment in part of its bottom line. And I mean, they bought it when it was in the low to mid 40s as far as how much per coin. It was about 44,000 on the day they bought it. As of this morning, it's 59,000 per coin. So they've made, a pretty decent profit already. Now, does that affect the bottom line? We don't really know, how we're going to do that when an earning report, let's say, comes up. I'm very curious if they're going to weave in the Bitcoin investment as opposed to how many cars they're selling and batteries. We don't yet know how that's going to play out. As for PayPal, though, I think PayPal's move, much like Square, is to say you can transact with Bitcoin.
Yeah. We're not playing the game. You can play the game, and we'll hold the money for you. Yeah.
Right. And I'm not a Bitcoin investor, but if I was looking at Bitcoin as, is this ever going to be any sort of a stable currency? I would say PayPal's move is more important even than Tesla's move. Tesla's move makes that company and Elon Musk much wealthier. Okay, what is that?
Right, but it's something. Tesla always looks like they're playing big at the roulette wheel,
Right.
PayPal is saying, we'll be a bank. If you want to be stupid or brilliant, we don't care. We'll be your bank on this.
Right. And if the PayPals and the Squares of the world say, hey, this is legitimate, this is a way to actually transact, that gives Bitcoin legitimacy beyond just the speculative investment. It also, I think, trickles down to Coinbase and gives them even more legitimacy as a trading platform for this stuff. And again, Coinbase is a couple of weeks from going public. So I think they're looking at the Tesla move and maybe rolling their eyes and saying, okay, those guys are getting rich. They're probably looking at the PayPal move and saying, aha, this gives even more credibility.
This makes us real. Yeah, as long as we're on Tesla, their stock reverses ahead of Q1 delivery data. And there's a lot of analysts are saying that's because they're suddenly getting real competition from little tiny startups all the way up to Ford, and Tesla now has to actually compete against real serious business people in a serious way. and their deliveries are going to slump no matter what, because every time you get competition, that happens. The question is, now that electric cars are legitimate and becomes a major market force, and you have the big boys playing, can Tesla maintain its sort of bachelor ways, or is it going to have to grow up?
Yeah, I think, I mean, look, as we speak right now, the CNBC just reports that the Tesla deliveries, 184,800 vehicles in the first quarter. That's apparently higher than expectations, but with Tesla, what are expectations? But all right, 184,800 vehicles. Analysts expecting 168,000, so slightly higher. At the same time, though, we got numbers from NIO, which is one of their competitors. They were higher than expected also. Volvo came out with its Polestar 2. I got to drive that last week.
Well, how was it?
It's very Volvo-like, and I mean that in a good way, as in, with a lot of these electric cars, they're almost selling you on the spaceship aspect of it all. This one drives and feels like a Volvo, big, boxy, it feels safe, but by the way, no gas, and I appreciate that. And I think that's going to move the EV market forward, because people aren't necessarily looking for spaceships. They're looking for what they like to drive, but better for the environment. And I think that's what this
Well, when I'm driving up to Oregon in a week or two, and I'm driving through Mendocino County, if I start seeing a lot of electric Volvos, I know the revolution has finally won.
Right, but it's going to be a while until you see a lot of them. But they are out, they are for sale, and yeah, that's going to cut into Tesla's bottom line, because Tesla had a lot of first mover advantage. But look, that to me is 100% good. We need more EVs, not just more Teslas.
Yeah, and all credit to them. I mean, there's first mover advantage, and they really took advantage of it. I mean, they really played it well, I think. All things considered. Yes. Be the first guy in the market. Usually the first guy in the market doesn't win. I mean, Gordon Moore said that to me once. He says, everyone talks about the first mover as the winner, but he says they get all the arrows in their back. They make all the mistakes. They cut the trail. It's the second and third players that come in that win the game. And, I think Tesla has managed to be the first one in and actually maybe the winner in the long run, which is an incredible achievement.
Right. I mean, they're a $650 billion company. All the automakers combined don't reach that. And so, yeah, they made hay with their first mover advantage. And one of the big successes that they have spawned is that other car companies are finally getting around to doing this. And that's good news.
Yeah. Another item, Fidelity. I mean, talk about, gilt edge. They plan to launch a Bitcoin. So, I mean, now we got big investment banks producing Bitcoin and all that. I was at a Zoom seminar yesterday, learning about Bitcoin from a global consulting firm. I mean, it's here. It's one of those, the story of technology is it just isn't going to happen. It gets big play, big promises, big future. And then we wait around going, well, where the hell is it? And it takes years and years and years. And then there's mistakes and everything else. And all of a sudden we wake up one morning and we have now incorporated it fully into our life. And we can't imagine what it was like before that. And Bitcoin seems right on the brink of that it's just going to become part of our daily existence pretty soon.
I guess so. It's just the price fluctuates so much. And remember, this is at its origin a currency, not an investment. And so I would say, sure, at some point, let's buy stuff with Bitcoin, because why not? But at this point, it's just too volatile as a currency / speculative investment.
It's a little too Weimar, where
yeah. And that's not a positive
no, that's not a good
connotation. Thing. No, in any way.
Okay, tech is gradually coming back to work. Companies like Facebook and Google have said their people can come back, but have not mandated vaccines. That's interesting. So you may have to use your vaccine passport to get on an airplane, but not to go to the office. That's wild.
Yeah, and I admit I don't know the laws on this, but it seems that big companies like Facebook and Cisco have come out and said, hey, we'd love you to get vaccinated, but you don't have to. I'm guessing at a lot of these tech companies, the numbers of people or the percentages are going to be quite high. I mean, people I talk to and interact with really want to get this vaccine. The good news of some of these companies gradually opening the doors is it's bringing people back to small businesses. A lot of these restaurants and bars and cafes are just getting creamed because the techies aren't wandering around getting coffee in the morning and getting their lunch. And we're starting to see a little bit of that come back. And this morning's job numbers are not only higher than expected, but the big gains are in leisure, hospitality, restaurants, that kind of thing. And that speaks to some of these small businesses able to hire some people back. And that's really good news also.
I saw that last week. I went to my favorite Italian place in downtown Sunnyvale to get takeout. And I walk in and it's full of people. And it was literally disorienting because I had been walking in there probably once or twice a month for the last year to this empty restaurant, walking past all of these tables. And I might see a DoorDash driver picking up something, but that was the only human being I talked to except the cook. And now I got there and there was a hostess and a waitress, and there were every table had a couple, oh man, interesting. Guys sitting there talking, got their laptops, and it was like, I remember this. This was a world that I once knew. It was very strange. Do I put my mask on? Do I take it off? I had no idea what to do.
It is weird to walk into your favorite place, right, to do some takeout, because that's what we've done. And they're like, hey, is this to go or in? And wait, we have that choice now?
Yeah, we have it in?
Right.
Well, I hope it works. I mean, I've noticed the roads are starting to fill up again. So that's a good sign. Yeah. Okay. CRISPR, the company, what's the name of the company? IGI.
Yeah.
It's IGI is a joint initiative between Berkeley and UCSF, right? And that's a CRISPR project. And they're going after sickle cell anemia, which is amazing.
This is an exciting development. CRISPR, the gene editing software, it's controversial, it's amazing. And it's sort of been on the shelf for a little bit during the pandemic because a lot of the labs were closed. But even pre-pandemic, they were starting to target sickle cell anemia specifically, and also how to bring the costs down of this because it's still a very, very expensive procedure. So that's sort of making a comeback now in the Bay Area, a lot of Silicon Valley. The timing on this is perfect. And I happen to be reading this book right now. So at the chapter on fighting. Yeah, Isaacson's new book, he's taken on Jobs and Da Vinci and now writing about the woman who launched CRISPR. Fascinating read, by the way. And literally right at the...
This is Jennifer Doudna, right?
Yeah, Jennifer Doudna. And it's
the Nobel Prize a few years ago.
There's your spoiler that I haven't gotten to yet, but yes, no, I'm kidding. We all know that. And so there's a lot of the Bay Area technology and universities and companies, because as you know, a lot of this stuff has now been commercialized, and there are companies out there doing this, and publicly traded companies, and now the fight is back on to take technology and battle sickle cell, and that's very exciting.
Yeah, it is. And, sickle cell is a particularly devastating disease, and it's an adaptive disease we don't need anymore, right? I mean, people in Africa, they survived because sickle cell kept them from getting malaria, but it's killed them. It kept them from getting malaria and dying at 10. So they lived to be 30 with sickle cell anemia. Well, that's not a problem in the 21st. It hasn't been a problem since the 20th century. And people were still dying from this archaic adaptation. And the fact that we can go in and edit it out is astounding. I mean, will we do it for Tay-Sachs? Will we do it for these other really horrible diseases that are legacies of another era? I hope
That's
so.
a big question. I mean, obviously there's a lot of ethics involved in this, but it's so fascinating. And, that Pandora's box is open, the door is open. And what we do from here, is still a bit of a question mark, but the idea that this exists and that it can fight things like sickle cell is very exciting. And it's really a buzz here in the Bay Area right now. Well,
I mean, we're really seeing the yin and the yang of genetic engineering, aren't we? Especially if COVID was actually engineered in the lab, we've seen the best and the worst. And I don't know, it's kind of terrifying. Tom Peters, the famous business consultant, he said to me once, I'm so glad I got to live to see the electronics revolution. And I'm so glad I'm not going to live to see the genetic revolution. And I kind of know what he means, you know. I mean, you use the perfect word. I mean, we have a Greek myth that, you know, fits here, Pandora's box, you know. And I don't know when does hope come out? At the very end, right? Well, you know, I hope hope comes out a little earlier before all the really bad stuff appears. So
I agree.
finally, Silicon Valley mega deal. We have this bet, right? Dollar bet about Google moving to downtown San Jose.
Right.
Okay. So there's a Silicon Valley mega deal. Mountain View sites have been bought by a developer for more than $600 million. And we all know where this is. I used to ride my bike there to buy comic books. This is the corner of San Antonio and El Camino. Okay. It used to be a Sears and all that. Now it's a, you know, giant complex with theaters and restaurants and all that. Well, this person is going to put up even more buildings. And interestingly, because this is appropriate, that's where Silicon Valley kind of began, modern Silicon Valley. Because at the corner of that parking lot is a little building, and that was Shockley Semiconductor, and it's still there. And so that's the side of Silicon Valley, and now it's going into its next phase. There's going to be a lot of Google buildings, offices in there, I believe. Mountain View is moving. I mean, they're not waiting for San Jose to steal Google. They're going full bore. And I'm not seeing a lot of action in downtown San Jose in that regard. I see everybody building around where Apple's going to be in expectation. But where's Apple? Where's Google?
Right. I mean, Google is working a little faster right now in Mountain View, it seems, than San Jose. But again, and one of the things we talked about with our bet is it's not going to be the economy that can possibly scotch the Google to San Jose deal. It's not Google. It's not a competitor. It might be the San Jose City Council.
Yeah, you keep mentioning them.
Yeah, well,
you're gonna get not gonna get a Christmas card from those
I know,
guys.
and nothing against them. I know some of them; they're good people, but they tend to move a little slow, and the tech world moves kind of fast.
Yeah,
Said, what moves even faster? Those developers that have built up and already bought a whole bunch of that on anticipation of the move, and that tells me it's probably likely to happen. But there are still some, if lack of a better term, political hurdles to jump.
Yeah, if you're going to be the capital city of Silicon Valley, you better move like Silicon Valley. I'm sorry. I mean, San Jose blew it twice in my lifetime. Missing the curve. And boy, they better not do it again this time. I actually, remember I gave a notorious speech that was a cover of Metro, where I slammed the bad decision making of, downtown San Jose. They better get it right this time. This is a big one.
I agree.
I want to remember one person. You've never met her. She hasn't been alive for 20 years, but the city of Sunnyvale is now going to put up the final towers in that long-awaited downtown, the one where the mall used to be. Then they tore the mall down, and it's basically been a giant vacant lot. It's been a cavity in the center of Sunnyvale now for 20 years. The woman's name is Fern Ort, and she was an 80-year-old lady, and she spent a year when they announced the original mall. She went to the city council for a year to tell them something important, and they never called on her. And finally, she got a hold of my father, who was the head of the Sunnyvale Historical Society, told him her story. He called me. I was still at Hewlett Packard. He said, you got to help this lady. You can't believe her story. Turns out that the city of Sunnyvale had planted a grove of redwood trees, a memorial for war veterans, kids who have been killed at Fremont High School, all of these important events in the 30s and early 40s. They planted the grove. Fern told me this story. She said, they can't cut him down. And I got the Merck and the Palo Alto Times to write front page stories about Fern and her trees. They moved the entire Sunnyvale Town Mall, giant buildings, to create an atrium for those trees. Well, they tore them all down. And I thought, what happens to Fern's trees? Well, for 20 years, I've driven by and watched them slowly deteriorate and become unhealthy out in this dirty vacant lot with weeds and everything else. Those buildings are going to go right there So I got a hold of the mayor of Sunnyvale a couple of days ago, and I said, what about ferns trees? And he told me, we had a bunch of meetings. We're saving the trees. We're going to create a little park for them. One of them didn't make it. And we're going to make some piece of furniture or something with a plaque on it or a bench, but we're going to save fern trees. And I've always thought that was emblematic of what was wrong and what could be right about Silicon Valley is ferns trees. So if you're ever heading down that way, if you see a little grove of redwood trees, remember the indomitable 80-year-old fern ort. Now, folks, you'll find us on the Silicon Valley Business Journal homepage, as well as on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and now YouTube. Have a great weekend. Nice and warm. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.